Welcome back to Soft Spoken Storytime, episode 59, SCP-028, Knowledge. SCP-028, Object Class, Safe, Special Containment Procedures. No special means are needed to contain at this time, as SCP-028 has not shown any change in size, position, or shape during the entire period of its containment, but access must be restricted. Currently, SCP-028 is contained on site. Site redacted. As SCP-028 is not transportable by any known means. SCP-028 is sealed in a 6 by 6 by 3 meter, 20 by 20 by 10 foot, concrete room with a single door, with 2 armed personnel stationed outside. Only authorized personnel are to be allowed exposure to SCP-028, and extreme care must be taken at all times. While SCP-028 is itself harmless, the effect can be very damaging to the unprepared. See document EL-028-1125. Description: SCP-028 is located in an abandoned storage yard outside a copper mine in northern Michigan. SCP-028 has no detectable physical presence of any kind, but its effect occurs in a 2.1 meter, 7 foot cube, around what is commonly held as the center of SCP-028. All forms of scanning and testing in the area of SCP-028 have shown no abnormal readings. Adding or removing objects or attempting to remove dirt from under SCP-028 has no effect in altering the size or shape of SCP-028's area of effect, nor the onset of quality of the effect. Subjects entering SCP-028 are, within 3 to 6 seconds, struck by total and complete knowledge of a subject. This knowledge is thus far completely random, in both size and usefulness, and sometimes goes unnoticed for extended periods of time. More profound knowledge generally has a stronger effect, with some cases expunged. See document EL-028-1125. This effect can be experienced multiple times by exiting and re-entering SCP-028, but can result in increasingly strong migraines and dizziness after 2 exposures. SCP-028 came to the Foundation's attention after research into news reports of a local miner who submitted a design for a cold fusion reactor to the U.S. Patent Office. Mr. Redacted reported that it just came to me like a bolt out of the blue. News and subjects were suppressed and contained after discovery of SCP-028, and the reactor designs implemented in the containment of SCP-1995. Subsequent testing of SCP-028 has yielded mixed results. Document number EL-028-1114. Partial Information Retrieval Log for 1-5 redacted. Note: all knowledge is perfect, total, and eidetic. Every phone book entry for New York City in 1998. how to redesign the internal combustion engine to run on human blood, using only pre-existing parts. Note: full redesign takes 4 hours and runs at higher efficiency than gasoline. Location of keys for a Butic Le Sabre. The proper method of care for a mole rat colony. Origin and history of 12 SCP objects. Note: the main expunged. Family history of the Blackthorn family, located in London, England. Geological structure of Earth beneath Greenland, including several unknown caves, and expunged. Document number EL0281125. Log. E112. Subject D1182 exposed to SCP-028. Subject began to cry and went into fetal position, showing signs of high distress. Unresponsive to questioning and outside stimulus for several days. Lapsed into catatonia shortly after stating that this is not life. Subject passed into a coma and died shortly thereafter. COD was attributed to shock. E127. Agent redacted, accidentally exposed to SCP-028. Agent showed signs of sudden surprise and bemusement. When questioned, Agent requested, "A moment to gather my thoughts, please." After several seconds, Agent laughed, shook his head, and removed his service pistol from its holster. Agent then shot and wounded Dr. Redacted, and killed Agents Redacted and Redacted, before being restrained. Post-incident interrogation revealed Agent Redacted had extensive knowledge of classified Foundation activities and several SCP objects he had not previously been exposed to, including SCP-2669. Any Foundation personnel found to have entered SCP-028's area of effect are to be detained indefinitely. Document number EL0281128. Log. Experiment 189. Subject D9843 was exposed to SCP-028. Redacted. 03-19, 1146. Examination of subject revealed abnormal respiratory actions. Redacted. 03-19, 1337. Questioning revealed subject had learned to recycle the carbon dioxide inside his body. Redacted. 03-19, 1721. Repeated attempts to teach skill to other D-Class personnel failed. Redacted. 07-18, 1211. Subject terminated. Redacted. 07-18, 1503. Autopsy reveals no abnormal organ functions. Redacted. 07-18, 1837. Researcher's notes. Dr. Redacted. Seriously, how the hell did he do that? SCP-029. Daughter of Shadows. Item number SCP-029. Object Class Keter. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-029 is to be incarcerated in a Class 5 containment cell. She is to be allowed access to nothing of a physical nature. Her containment cell is to be placed behind a triple airlock to avoid her escape. As of Incident 02934A, SCP-029 is no longer to be fed, and as she does not appear to need sustenance to survive. There are to be 3 guards on duty at all times on her cell, and 2 guards on monitor duty. Floodlights have been installed in the walls of the containment chamber and are to be on at all times. Once a month, the chamber is to be cleaned and checked for defects. Under absolutely no circumstances are any men to encounter SCP-029 in any manner. Any males who do encounter SCP-029 are to be held under Class 3 detention for interviewing before termination. SCP-029 has requested a bed, denied, a blanket, denied, books, denied, clothes, denied. This is ridiculous. The girl can't even have clothes. We are not animals. Let her cover herself. Dr. Erica Bodine. Dr. Bodine, you are granted permission to deliver clothes to SCP-029. Dr. Light. As of Incident 029-53B, anyone who has potential access to SCP-029 is required to first watch surveillance tape 029 Bodine as a reminder of threats involved when working with SCP items and SCP-029 in particular. Description: SCP-029 appears to be a pubescent female of Asiatic Indian descent. She appears to suffer from alopecia universalis. Over 80% of her pigmentation is a true black, while the rest of her skin is a complete lack of melanin to the point of albinism. Her eyes are also a dark black in color. SCP-029 has severe homicidal tendencies and has displayed a remarkable ability to use any item as a weapon. However, she has a severe compulsion against shedding blood, preferring instead to strangle her victims. SCP-029 has demonstrated dexterity and physical reactions 4 times as fast as the average human. SCP-029 has also displayed extensive resistance to damage of all forms. Both of these extra-human abilities are greatly hampered in the presence of bright or direct light, natural or artificial. In addition, any males who come within the presence of SCP-029, an area defined by her current perception, find themselves pliant to her will. Such males become willing to kill or even die for SCP-029. SCP-029 refers to herself as redacted, which roughly translates to Daughter of Darkness, Daughter of Shadows, or Daughter of Night. Interviews with SCP-029 have proven difficult to conduct due to SCP-029's constant attempts to kill or convert all who speak with her. Over her years of captivity, the black patches on her skin have increased in size. SCP-029 was first brought to the Foundation's attention by an agent working in rural India. An attempt on his life led him to a small cult of men who claimed to be Thuggees in service to the daughter. Several weeks of investigation proved that they believed the world to be in the last years of the Kali Yuga, and that by sacrificing 1 million lives to the Daughter of Darkness, they could raise their goddess and end the world. They also believed that only sacrifices performed through strangulation added to this tally. Events led the agent to the mountain fortress, where he discovered SCP-029. After the loss of said agent, data expunged, which ended in our acquisition of SCP-029. Addendum. 7 years after capture, SCP-029 began showing anomalous growth in her black pigmentation. When questioned about it, she claimed her followers were on the move once more. Investigation led us to a concentration of so-called thuggies that had escaped our initial foray. After discovering that all her followers were there for one of their holy days, a tactical airstrike was called in. When the first bomb dropped, SCP-029 awoke from her slumber, screaming at the top of her lungs. SCP-029 continued to scream for the next 4 hours, ranting and raving that we were killing her people. Since said event, the growth of black pigmentation has stopped completely. Also, since said event, SCP-029 has redoubled her efforts to escape. SCP-2820 has been proposed as a possible method of neutralization should the situation worsen. SCP-030, the Homunculus. Item Number SCP-030. Object Class Safe. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-030 is to be held at Site-17 within a modified humanoid containment cell. Minor adaptations to accommodate its stature, such as an appropriately scaled workspace and chair, are to be included. Lighting within the cell may be altered upon request of SCP-030 to a maximum of 2,000 lumens via a simple dimmer switch. Should the need to render SCP-030 inert arise, staff may extinguish the lighting from the exterior switch and draw blackout curtains as necessary. Standard night vision equipment is available for observation of SCP-030 in its inert state. SCP-030 may request materials for personal research every 90 days. All previously requested materials are to be collected and destroyed prior to delivery of new materials. All materials are to be evaluated and screened by both research and security staff. SCP-030 is to be denied access to any modern scientific journals or texts, and fiction is to be restricted to works produced no later than 1623 CE to preserve the integrity of its innate knowledge. Staff wishing to consult with SCP-030 in writing are to place a formal request, document number 030-RS/B, with the supervising researcher on duty. All correspondence is to be retained. Staff wishing to consult with SCP-030 in person are to submit a formal request to Site Management, document 030-RP/A, 17-030/A, at least 30 days prior to their preferred consultation date. All consultations are to be recorded and retained. Senior research staff may request SCP-030 be temporarily removed from its containment for a maximum of 1 hour to provide observational insight into non-restricted materials or events within Site-17. Under no circumstances is SCP-030 to leave the confines of Site-17. Requests must be presented in person to site management and security staff at least 30 days prior to their preferred observational release date. All observational release events are to be recorded and retained. SCP-030 has been equipped with a tracking device. Inventory Control Code number 030-17-1, so its location within Site-17 may be determined precisely at any time. Description: SCP-030 appears as a hairless, genderless, gray-toned human, 71 centimeters, 28 inches, in height, and weighing 12.70 kilograms, 2 British stone in antiquated measure. Its solid blue eyes lack discernible irises or pupils and resemble small cut sapphires. SCP-030 possesses an androgynous voice with a pronounced English accent, not currently identifiable as specific to any modern region. It is able to converse, read, and write in ancient Greek, Latin, Italian, English, Spanish, and Portuguese, as well as 2 additional languages that have not yet been identified, despite SCP-030's insistence that they should be common knowledge. SCP-030 has also demonstrated knowledge of physics, chemistry, astronomy, mathematics, and horticulture, roughly equivalent to that of a 17th century CE academic. In addition, SCP-030 has demonstrated knowledge on these topics along research lines that do not appear in the historical record. These alternative or entirely unknown approaches to research in the natural sciences are one source of SCP-030's utility in consultation. SCP-030 remains active while a 15-lumen source of light or greater is within 1.5 meters, 5 feet. In the absence of light, SCP-030 becomes inert, apparently losing consciousness and showing no outward signs of life. Within 5 to 10 seconds of being re-exposed to light, SCP-030 becomes active once more. Appearing to come out of a light slumber no matter how long the period of inactivity had been. SCP-030 does not appear to require these periods of inactivity as a human would require sleep, and has expressed a desire to remain active as often as possible. Biopsy analysis of SCP-030 remains inconclusive. While clays native to the English countries of Kent, Surrey, and Greater London make up the majority of its structure, traces of mandrake, lye, mercury, and human blood have been found in each sample taken. SCP-030 has expressed that a full exploratory surgery to determine its workings would potentially end its existence. Samples removed from SCP-030 do not regenerate, and sampling is currently discontinued to preserve its integrity. Although SCP-030 can be damaged, it does not appear to feel pain, and will simply remold any portion of its anatomy that experiences deformation. Notably, SCP-030 cannot be molded directly by human hands, though any number of tools may be used to alter its surface. SCP-030 does not respirate, requires no sustenance, and produces no waste, although it does infrequently request a bath. SCP-030 refers to itself as Ariel, and regularly requests that staff do the same. Questions regarding how SCP-030 was created and by whom are routinely answered with the seemingly roll statement, "I have been asked to forget that bit of information. Terribly sorry." SCP-030 delivers this response in the same tone and cadence each time any question regarding its origins or creator are presented. Given its composition and location of origin, a link to the alchemists of Algada is suspected. SCP-030 was discovered 6/12 redacted during a mandatory archaeological survey within London's Mortlake district, pending construction of a car park. It was buried approximately 2.7 meters, 9 feet, below street level, contained in a small stone sarcophagus. The sarcophagus bore no markings and was assumed to be that of a deceased infant, as additional graves were discovered in the survey area. The sarcophagus lid was shattered during the excavation, exposing SCP-030 to daylight. Upon being struck by the sun's rays, SCP-030 roused from its inert state to one of mild activity within a few seconds, stating, "Good afternoon," to the assembled construction team. A member of the Foundation's Greater London Recon Force was summoned within hours and took the specimen into custody without resistance. The limited number of witnesses were given amnestics and released. Addendum 1. Document 030-C Security Logs for SCP-030. 9/14 redacted. Tracking system installed for SCP-030. 12/21 redacted. SCP-030 reports malfunction of its own tracking system. Repairs completed within 6 hours. SCP-030 offers to assist, but is refused for security purposes. 3/13 redacted. SCP-030 completes 18-week seminar on Unknown Language Alpha, Zephyr. 5 staff researchers considered fluid. Lexicography submitted 205 redacted. 7/2 redacted. While in consultation, researcher redacted inadvertently makes several remarks regarding photovoltaic technology. Consultation ended before the researcher can substantively elaborate. 8/12 redacted. SCP-030 requests a supply of magnesium and indicates it intends to ignite samples to study the light produced. Request denied by researchers. 11/14 redacted. Incident 030-1. Using only what appears to be standard potting soil, ginger, a 72-gram sample of rutilated quartz, and a 23-centimeter length of coiled copper wire, SCP-030 produces an object/device capable of emitting notable levels of directed ultraviolet light through unknown means. Device is confiscated. Effects not currently replicable without direct intervention from SCP-030. Researchers currently in consultation to determine if this line of SCP-030's research will be permitted to continue. It is speculated SCP-030 may be working towards an alternative and possibly anomalous manifestation of the photoelectric effect after receiving only minimal information regarding its existence. All research by SCP-030 suspended and materials removed pending review. Clicked on Alchemists. Finding balance. Unless the aethers shall be in balance. The 5 aethers are the foundations of practical alchemy and must always be respected. Some call them elements, others eidolons, and other more esoteric names. The aethers, however, are the pure elemental forces of the universe: air, earth, fire, water, electricity, aeriness, terriness, igneous, aqueous, and fulminous. Respect the aethers, and they will serve well. Excerpt: Practical Alchemy by R. Diaghilev. Rostislav Diaghilev woke to the sound of the cosmos rushing in his ears. That and the liquid clock that was gifted to him for his birthday last year. He blinked the bleary sleep from his eyes and sat up into the cold autumn morning. The first inklings of light were slipping through the windows as he swung his feet out and over the edge of the bed. Across the room, faintly glowing liquids burbled happily in their decanters. Soft orange and blue light emanated from several tubes, rushing around the apparatus with merry abandon. He rose with a grunt, shuffling towards the laboratory on the other side of the room, while reaching out to touch the series of activation studs on the wall for the muted amber overhead lighting. He smiled as the orb slowly winked to life, the deep amber light turning the room from shadows to a world of deepest bas relief. As the light spread across his workbench, the familiar sights of numerous textbooks, fragments of recipes, and formulae appeared before him. His chalkboard, covered in his heavy angular script, shone with the faint sheen of recently erased chalk. Reaching out with one tired hand, Rostislav turned the activation knob for the burner underneath the faintly glowing blue liquid, causing it to bubble higher and the overflow to slowly drip into the brown liquid in the largest decanter. He agitated the mixture with a glass rod while chanting quietly in a language that few knew, and fewer still dared to utter. As he chanted, the mixture turned from a dark brown to a light brown with a golden sheen. He smiled and turned the knob, allowing some of the liquid to flow into an earthenware jar. He raised the vessel to his lips, and a smile spread over his face as the liquid passed through his mouth and down into his stomach. Ah, I've finally done it. Counteracted the aeriness ether. Finally, it tastes like coffee. He felt the fatigue and discomfort of waking so early washing away as the filter took its effect. Rostislav Diaghilev, alchemist of the 7th Circle, looked out of his windows across the snow-laden scene from his cabin. He nodded, taking another sip of the mixture before replacing the jug on the table. Alchemy, like any other science, has laws, rules. These laws and rules may bend from time to time, but they are as indelible as physics. While the physical sciences may be more practically applicable, the simple need for the containment of alchemical anomalies requires special attention to the alchemic arts. Excerpt: The Sealing Way, M.R. Tissart. First historical mentions of anomalies. Hours later, R. Diaghilev, as his name tag so helpfully proclaimed him, sat hunched in his car in the line to get into Site 79. The snow had started to fall faster now, and Ruzlov sighed in frustration. The snow always caught in the hem of his robes. The line to get into the site was unusually long due to the weather, and his heater wasn't as strong as it used to be. A few minutes passed, and Ruzlov came to the front of the line and presented his credentials to the security personnel at the gate. He pulled up, looking the man in the eye and catching the hint of a smirk on his face. The guard took the card and scanned it before handing it back. "Thank you. Please proceed." Ruzlov suppressed a sigh at the grin on the security guard's face. He was well used to the stares and the questionable deference he had from his colleagues. He pulled into his parking spot and got out of his car, cursing under his breath at the snow on the floor of the parking structure. He brushed a small spot away and counted his steps before reaching 88, then reciting a quiet formulae. A junior researcher stared at him as he did, nearly breaking his concentration. The researcher may not have thought much of Ruzlov's robes, but the snow never quite reached them after his recitation. He smiled to himself and said a thanks to the Aranist ether for its assistance. He walked through the halls, the quiet swish of his robes at odds with the hard clack of the researcher's shoes and the quiet clicks of high heels. His own shoes were made of rubber, properly made in accordance with ancient formulae many years ago. They were bright purple, and the shoes themselves were poorly stitched, but he was an alchemist, not a cobbler. They were warm, waterproof, silent, and earned him the nickname Grapefoot from his college companions. He settled into his office with a quiet sigh and pulled his phone out of the recesses of his robes, plugging it into his computer to charge. He muttered a thank you to the fulminous ether and a curse to Apple for short battery life. The office was functional, covered in a few workbenches, one of which contained a simple decanter reduction system. The only other door in the office led to the lab, connected to his colleague's office as well. The drab concrete walls fit Ruzlov's personality perfectly, and he smiled at the calendar beside his desk. There were cats on it. Ruzlov settled into his workstation to go over morning emails. There was always some bureaucratic nonsense to deal with at the Foundation. And so it has come to us, the wise, to protect the world. The Foundation is our best chance to seal off the influence of the entities for all time. As such, I propose that we take action once and for all, create the Great Seal, and for all time prevent such incursions into our reality. Excerpt: A Call to Action, R. Diaghilev. As the 12th hour of the day arrived, Ruzlov's stomach rumbled with hunger, and he put down the report on a filter of molasses which some famous American had used to attain immortality. He left a few final scribbles on his notes for now, and stood up, stretching his broad shoulders with a yawn. He started his way towards the cafeteria with slowly creeping fatigue. The filter from this morning had to be wearing off. He hoped quietly to himself that he made enough to last a few weeks at least. That particular convergence wasn't likely to happen again for a very long time. As he walked along, He spotted Dr. Collins walking towards the cafeteria and waved slightly. The doctor looked over and smiled, waiting for Rislov to catch up, before they walked in tandem towards the cafeteria. "It's good to see you, Rislov. Have a good weekend?" Rislov nodded and smiled at Dr. Collins. "Yes, my filter finally came into the proper solution this morning. I was very happy to say that it worked without any difficulty." Rislov took a left turn toward the cafeteria, the sounds of conversation filling the off-white hallways. They joined a small crowd on the escalators up to level 3 to the cafeteria. It opened out into the expansive and tastefully decorated cafeteria level. They had remodeled recently, the dark glass looking out over fields of snow-covered grass. The dark tile of the floor complemented the subtle burgundy of the walls, all colors Rislov found pleasing. Dr. Collins smiled at Rislov as they continued to walk towards the serving area. "Congratulations, Rislov. I had hoped it would happen soon. Is this the same super coffee you were discussing before?" Dr. Collins got into the line for the hot buffet and grabbed a tray, loading up a couple plates with his usual starchy fare. He had gained a few pounds recently, stress eating, due to a recent project. Rislov grabbed his own tray, loading it up with a mix of vegetables, a light salad, and a large piece of some pink fish, pretending to be salmon. "Yes, I am happy to say it works properly. This morning was significantly easier." He grabbed up a small tray of cookies, his one indulgence, and headed to the top of the line. Dr. Collins flashed his ID to pay for his lunch, and Rislov did the same, the two of them heading to an empty table nearby. Several other researchers waved to Dr. Collins, and the two sat down, digging into lunch with abandon. The other tables were rapidly filling up, but Rislov and Dr. Collins had one of the smaller round tables to themselves. His dark brown robe stood out from the white-coated researchers, but they did every day. They made small talk for a few minutes before a young researcher stepped up to their table, looking eager and bright-eyed. "Dr. Collins, I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the new research topics you had suggested last week." Dr. Collins looked up and quickly swallowed the bite he was chewing through. "Of course, Daniel. This is Rislov Diaghilev, one of the members of the Alchemy Division." Rislov looked up to meet the eyes of the young man displaying the usual mix of confusion and surprise. "How do you do, young man?" Rislov held out one large hand, shaking the younger man's hand firmly. "Oh, good. It's nice to meet you, Dr. Diaghilev," Daniel said a little too fast, not particularly covering up his confusion very well. "I'm not a doctor, but I understand the confusion. Mr., or if you're being very formal, Elder is the appropriate title." He tried to hide his grimace as the usual look of incredulity passed over the young man's features. Dr. Collins looked over at Rislov and quirked his head. "If I heard you right, you guys are getting a new hire today, unless Jameson was talking out of his ass again." He scooped up his last bite of pasta and leaned back. Rislov's eyebrows raised, the deep lines on his face creasing. "New hire? I wasn't aware we were getting new apprentices anymore." And I hadn't realized anyone could even feel the currents anymore, he thought to himself. "I'll have to consult with my colleagues." Dr. Collins rose, escorting Daniel away. "Till next time, Rislov. Enjoy your studies." And so, our Alchemy Division shall henceforth be tasked with the sealing and secrecy of Initiative Redacted. All knowledge of alchemy shall be discredited. All maintenance of the seals, circles, and other alchemical devices shall be entrusted to R. Diaghilev and M. Abadeo, Directors of the Alchemy Division. Excerpt. 05 Council Plan of Action, number redacted. The quiet walk back to his office was uneventful. Upon reaching his door, he heard a quiet tingling, a soft sound like water upon a starlit lake. He closed his eyes, growing lost in the sound, the aqueous ether speaking to him in the deepest language the universe offered. It was soon a convergence. He would be able to access both the aqueous and the erroneous. It was finally time to begin the next steps in his process. He hurried to the lab, where his only colleague, Elder Abadeo, stood, his coal-black skin a stark contrast to the, if he was honest with it, tacky, milk-white robes he wore all the time. The walls of the lab were unlike any other room in the site. From top to bottom, copper chisels had been used to inscribe it with formulae of containment, order, and protection. Ruslov and Abadeo had prepared this room over 16 painstaking months, using various convergence elements and stored ether where necessary. This room was the alchemical equivalent of a bomb shelter, and the only place they dared to work any significant research. The walls were lined with tables containing several decanter reduction systems, wind flow apparatus, a few burners, and even a fine earth separator. Mounted on one wall was a solid wooden holder, which contained 2 heavy croziers, one of brass and wood belonging to Abadeo, and the other of cold iron and lead belonging to Ruslov. Across from the crozier stand was a set of 3 concentric circles set in the floor. The first was polished, inscribed copper. The second was cold iron. The last was the finest and most delicate gold. The materials for the last circle had been transmuted from pure ether to common lead, then to gold. You felt it too, Ruslov. The rich syllables of the third language flowed from his lips, his mellifluous accent blending perfectly with the interplay of light and dark in the phonemes. His hand spread over the wind flow measures and pinwheels on his desk. He felt the swirling currents as he hurried to the equipment along the wall. He adjusted several knobs, and the liquids began to bubble, already taking on a soft glow. Of course, I felt it. Where are you in the harness of the erroneous? Abadeo's specialty lay in the erroneous ether, and Ruslov would be significantly more comfortable in the aqueous. Abadeo's hands spread slightly as he switched to the second language, approaching the beginnings of the true language quickly. I'm almost there. Could you bring me the circle of erroneous binding? Ruslov nodded, and picked up a copper circlet, inscribed with the various symbols occult organizations had cribbed from ancient alchemists in centuries past. We're going to renew the 13th seal this time, yes? Ruslov placed the circlet on Abadeo's head, crowning his shaved scalp. Yes. The creature made a noise a few months ago, and we need to make sure it's held. The seal is almost in the fullness of its shape. With this we can... A sudden crack of ether sped through the lab, disrupting the energies shaped by the words of the second language. The fulminous aether surged quickly, pushing back against the ritual motions and words. From the currents of the unseen, a laughing sound could be heard. Accompanying the electric energy of the fulminous aether was an empty feeling. The feeling of chaining and binding, of energies reflected and amplified. Ruslov knew that feeling well. The laughter echoed in the paths of his memory as his eyebrows narrowed, his teeth setting in a snarl. The Scarlet King was bucking his seal and attempting to push back against Ruslov and Abadeo. Ruslov's hands blurred as he drew the simple iron circle from the space under the lab desk and tossed it into the air. His hands spread as he began to chant in the first language, one step removed from the true language. The iron circle stayed suspended in the air for a moment before bouncing and landing on its side, slowly spinning around on its side. Abadeo's head burst into sweat as the aethers compressed. "They're pushing back. I do not know how long." His words were strange now, the second language's powers being stretched to their limits. Rizlov's voice rang out like thunder, and he pulled his hands to his sides, his fist clenched. "You will not disrupt our work today. I push you back to whence you are. Be gone, Scarlet King." With a sudden crack of thunder, the building energies flowed into the iron circle, grounding harmlessly into the hand-forged iron. The laughter turned to a snarling sound of pain as the chains around the entity went taut again, pulling it tight. All went quiet, except for Elder Abadeo's chanting. Several minutes passed as Brizlov's breath came back to him. The effort required to banish the fulminous aether gathered by the Scarlet King to push against their ritual had been staggering. But he'd forced it into the circle at last, the energies contained within the ring of purified metal. Shaped by hand, with the right rituals, nothing could break it in the aether. Only a mortal hand could undo the energies stored there now, and even then, they would need to be significantly gifted in the art. Rislov struggled over the lab desk and put his hands to work on the aqueous harness for the ritual. The waters and filters bubbled as he spoke quietly in the second language, his words blending with Abadeo's and forming a harmonious chorus. The energies of the aether poured into the small vial of purified water, creating truly elemental water. He held it gingerly between two fingers and brought it to Abadeo's station. "Elemental water. This will reinforce the seal perfectly. Did you get yours?" He held up a small pinwheel, brightly colored like a child's toy. The ultra-fine inscriptions on the blades were near invisible to the naked eye. It spun slowly with the small air currents flowing around it. "Of course, Elder. I will perform the ritual tonight. Our colleagues in Vienna and Casa Verde should have the fire and earth required." A quiet knock on the door drew both of their attention. To the small crowd of onlookers, several of them had hands over their mouths, trying not to laugh. Rislov's heart dropped. They couldn't feel a single thing of what just happened. To them, it was just two old men screaming at nothing and pantomiming. "What?" he growled, his hands shaking with exhaustion and his mind filled with annoyance. "Your, new hires here? Mike sent me to get you, Mr. Diaghilev." Rislov narrowed his eyes. It was the young man from lunch, Daniel. He sighed heavily. "Of course, thank you." He shuffled off silently, his shoes completely silent. The last thing he heard was Daniel's voice under his breath. "What's up with the purple shoes?" "Why do we keep these people around? I know we're all about the anomalous, but there's no way these guys are for real. They're just wasting Foundation resources. The amount of money they spend on raw copper is absurd." Excerpt. Email from Site Director, redacted. The rumors were true, then. Rislov turned and headed toward the front gate, nodding at the various doctors, security staff, and administrative staff he passed. Most of them didn't give him odd looks anymore. A few flights of stairs, which were getting harder, and muttered thanks to the aethers at the correct times, brought him to the front desk, where a nervous-looking young man stood in the lobby of the site, along with Mike. Mike was giving him an odd look, with a hand on his hip near to his baton. The reception area looked fairly plain. There was a desk behind which Mike sat, and a few rows of chairs along 2 walls which visitors were seated in. The drab top walls stood out slightly from the off-brown carpet across the floor. 2 men looked at Mike, and the young man with careful attention, interested in what was taking place before them. The magazines they'd been reading were tossed back on the table between the 2 sets of chairs. The waiting room always reminded Roslov of a doctor's office waiting area. "I'm telling you, son, I can't let you bring unapproved weapons onto the site." His eyes were locked on the glass and silver crozier in his hand, the twin snakes of Asclepius. Roslov smiled as his eyes hesitated for a moment over the young man's robe, of royal blue. Unpretentious, functional, and yet tastefully traditional. Perhaps there was hope yet. He held up a hand to Mike. "It's not a weapon, Mike. It's a crozier. Alchemist tools. He's all right." Mike looked over at Roslov and nodded after a moment. He sat back down at the office chair in front of the monitors. The young man couldn't see, but the 2 waiting patrons relaxed as well. MTF members took threats and potential threats seriously. "I am Roslov Diaghilev, alchemist of the—" Roslov started, his voice tired and heavy, expecting very little of the young man in front of him. "7th Circle. Yes, sir. I was recommended to study under you by Alan Barnes of the 5th Circle. He said you were the best, and one of the last practical appliers of the art." The clear Barcelona accent on his English lisped a few of the S's, but he was reasonably understandable. Roslov narrowed his eyes and switched to a form of Proto-Etruscan, the 8th language, closer to the true language, but still distant enough for conversation. "And how trained are you, young man? Do you know the vagaries of the art? Have you been initiated?" The young man hesitated, and his head dropped slightly. He attempted to speak as well. "I am to be not practiced in the art as one such as are you to be. My—" He attempted to pronounce the name of the language poorly. "Is not very good. I am sorry." Roslov smiled and nodded, switching back to English. "You're more than a dabbler, young man. What's your name?" "Arturo Genuomo, sir," he said, with a deep bow, which shook the backpack slightly on his frame. Roslov's face split into one of the first genuine smiles of the day as he took notice of the equipment on his pack, which marked him as a student of the aqueous ether. "Welcome to the site, Arturo. Please walk with me." He turned and silently walked off, Arturo's odd purple shoes an exact match for his own. "As I've told you, they're not frauds. I've witnessed what they can do firsthand, and the O5 Council says they're necessary. You've seen the budget allotments for the alchemy division. It's not like we haven't encountered alchemical SCP objects. Just give them a chance, Jim." Excerpt. Email from Dr. Collins in response to Site Director, redacted.